Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 136 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Monday afternoon, and I'm joined by Scott Coleman. Scott, it's lunchtime for both of us, kind of, on both sides. How are you?
Hello, Brad. I'm doing well. The podcast never sleeps.
That's right.
Even if maybe we don't have like groundbreaking, sound all the alarms news today to talk about, but there has been just enough news since the last time we did a podcast to say, hey, let's do a show. Let's talk about some stuff. And here we are.
Yeah, so we should say at the top of the show, we are part of Foul Territory as a network. We are Hammer Territory. We cover the Atlanta Braves all year long, and we actually have lots of podcasts in the bank the last few days and weeks. We had Justin Toscano and Grant McCauley on the show last week. Scott and I did a show on Saturday that is still relevant at this point in time. But as you sort of alluded to, there's a little bit of news and notes. This will be a short one, I promise. We sometimes we say that, and it's not. This is going to be a short one, I'm pretty sure. But we talked about Jeff Hoffman on Saturday, you and I did, Scott, and some interesting reporting since then. So in case you missed it, Jeff Hoffman was a potential target of the Braves. We talked about a lot this winter. Potential hybrid guy, reliever mostly, but could be a starter, et cetera, et cetera. He signed a deal with the Blue Jays over the weekend for 3 for 33. Reasonable deal for him. It was reported at the time, as we discussed, that Baltimore had failed a physical on Jeff Hoffman. So that's the backdrop. Then today, Monday, as we're recording this podcast, Mark Bowman, friend of the pod, from MLB.com, reported that Hoffman had a potential deal that was quote-unquote nixed when he failed a physical with the Braves medical staff. So that's the closest the Braves have come to signing a free agent, it seems like. at least the real one this winter. What did you make of this? And look, it's not a huge surprise. When you fail a physical somewhere else, you might fail a physical somewhere. But hey, this is direct Braves news, and it was interesting timing too.
Yeah, I think our co-host Stephen Tolbert said it best, that it's fitting that in like 2 months, the biggest bit of news that we've had, like honest reporting Braves news, is that the team didn't sign somebody because of medical concerns. I will say, even if we would have all been really excited if the Braves signed Hoffman, if it would have come out that 2 other teams failed him on medical concerns and the Braves were the team that signed him, I mean, I think you and I would probably do a show terrified that, and it wasn't just Hoffman's elbow, but his shoulder is apparently the concern too. So, yeah, I mean, in the big picture, he signed with Toronto, probably the last time we're going to say Jeff Hoffman's name on this podcast for at least a couple of years. But the fact that Mark Bowman, who I think, even if, I mean, Justin said it on the podcast a week ago, it's like Fort Knox trying to get information out of the Braves. But, you know, the fact that Bowman has been doing this for decades, he's very concrete in his reporting and his sources. So to me, I believe it. I think we said on the podcast a couple of days ago that we would not be surprised if the Braves did check in on Hoffman to some level. And this does kind of confirm that not only were the Braves in on Hoffman and that there were real concerns about medicals, but also the fact that the Braves are seemingly pretty serious about adding to their bullpen and spending some dollars in order to do it.
I was going to ask you what you think this means, because I think it probably is just that. The bullpen and smoke is out there, to be sure. The Tanner Scott stuff from DOB we talked about a couple weeks ago, he's still unsigned for the record. Also, look, I'll be the cynic. Scott, I'll do the job of cynic. Sometimes that's you on the podcast. I'll do it right now and just say there's a whiff of, hey, guys, we're trying to me. Like there's a whiff of this. I'm not saying that's the case. The Braves are not really a team that actually cares too much about PR. I don't think Alex is a big PR guy really at all. I don't think he much does that kind of stuff. But like you could read this as the Braves wanted it out there that they're trying to sign free agents because the buzz is so negative. I'm not saying that I think that, but that is a thing that I could see as a person who follows the media stuff very closely. That could be an angle that you could take. But yeah, I think it more is, hey, we're looking at the bullpen. Justin said the same thing. You know, we talked about, like, I don't necessarily believe, at least I don't think that it's the number one priority for me, but if it is for the Braves, that would be in line with Alex's history. He is someone who likes to invest in the bullpen. We discussed that ad nauseum this winter already. And yeah, there's also a potential that Hoffman could have been in line for a Reynaldo Lopez hybrid potential starter model at a cheap price that would have appealed to the Braves, but he still has been a reliever primarily. So I find it really interesting. I do think that if all we knew when that deal broke this weekend was that the Braves were signing him to 333 and one team had failed a physical on him, we would have noted it on the reaction podcast. It would have been like, all right, this is a little bit scary. If it came out 2 days later that another team failed him, our antennas would have gone up, like you said. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying the Braves shouldn't have signed Jeff Hoffman. We just can't possibly know that with where you and I sit and without access to the medicals. But shoulders are kind of scary. I mean, elbows are always scary for pitchers, but shoulders are almost in some ways more scary if it's a real shoulder issue for a guy who needs to be able to throw hard, all that stuff. So I would have liked to react to Jeff Hoffman signing with the Braves. That would have been fun for us, and he would help the team. If he's healthy, he would definitely help the team. But there's enough smoke here where it's like, all right, I always get it. If you actually, and by the way, what'd you make of this? It says potential deal. Bowman did not say they agreed to a deal. Bowman, the wording was very specific. It said potential deal. So I wonder if it got as far as like we agreed to a deal and then nixed it, or if it was like, all right, we have a rough framework in place, but we need to check out your medicals. I don't know which one of those it was. It's kind of in the weeds, but I found that interesting too.
Yeah, it's chicken or the egg. And but it is an interesting point of how far along were they? If Hoffman was cleared and the elbow and shoulder looked good, was it a matter of him then going to the room next door and signing a contract? Or was it part 3 of a 5-stage process in order to get him done? Make sure, you're not wasting everyone's time for then just to be like, oh, his shoulder has problems. And, of course, it's 2 medical teams, which I think really does lend the likelihood that something could be wrong with the shoulder. And funny enough, old friend Kirby Yates, actually years ago, the Braves failed Kirby Yates on a medical, and then Toronto ended up signing him. And about 2 months later, Kirby Yates underwent Tommy John surgery. I'm not saying it's a 1-for-1 comparison here, but I think it's probably fair to say that Toronto's medical standards might be a little bit less than what the Braves and other teams are. But just because there's concerns about an elbow or a shoulder does not mean the next time Jeff Hoffman picks up a baseball that he's going to need 2 years worth of surgery and rehab.
Right. Another cynical view would be like every pitcher has something. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, it's a realistic thing. I can't remember who I saw say that, but it's true. Like you could probably fail any pitcher on a medical if you wanted to. And there are degrees, of course, of this. And something we just can't know. I do like to acknowledge on the show what we can and can't know, and we simply cannot know how bad the medical was on Jeff Hoffman. But there's no way of knowing that. If you want to tell us in the comments that you don't, almost certainly. So, I get it. It's one of those things that it's not quite an emergency podcast for us, but I thought that it was like, all right, this is probably needs to leave the show because it was the Braves actually almost signed someone, and that's as close as they've gotten, at least that we know about.
Maybe that's the title of this episode. The Braves almost signed someone.
That might be you know what, Scott? That's probably going to be the title of this episode once we post it. We've just workshopped that on the air. There is other news that we'll get to. In fact, it's smaller news, but it's a recognizable name if you've been following the NL East for quite some time. The Braves reportedly signed a minor league deal with a spring training invite for Garrett Cooper. Who is Garrett Cooper? Well, he was basically the full-time first baseman for the Marlins for a few years, not that long ago. And it's been joked about plenty. I think you have on this podcast, dating back to our old stomping grounds, talked about Garrett Cooper as a Braves killer. I actually went and pulled this. He actually lit the Braves on fire in 2021 and 2022 to the tune of like an OPS near 1,000 across 2 seasons. He's not that good, but he was a Braves killer for a couple seasons. But I will say he was a real starting caliber player in the big leagues for 5 years. He had a 110 WRC plus with the Marlins over 5 seasons from 2019 through 2023. Now, last year, he was kind of all over the place, didn't play very much, got DFA'd, got traded, et cetera, et cetera. So he's been off the radar. And he's mostly a first baseman, which is interesting. But we'll come back to that in a second. What did you make of this beyond just the obvious connection to a former NL East guy?
Yeah, it's funny. We've mentioned probably a dozen non-guaranteed spring training invite signings this winter. And Garrett Cooper probably doesn't rise to the level of like Brian De La Cruz, who has like some legitimately interesting things, and he's younger and has some tools and isn't far removed from being quite good with Miami. And then there's also like Eddie Alvarez, who we talked about for literally 9 seconds on the podcast over the weekend.
Yeah.
Cooper's probably in the middle of that at some point. Cooper, if he wasn't in the National League East, he probably wouldn't be nearly as familiar of a name to most Braves fans. But you said it, once upon a time, he was a good hitter in the major leagues. Of course, defensively, there's a real question, and that's probably the next point of this conversation. Where does he play short of injury? But the Braves will have probably one spot on the bench where it's kind of like a wild card, and they can utilize it however they want, whether it be a more offensive focused player, a guy who's a speed threat on the bases, a super utility guy, a third catcher. Basically, the way you have to construct your team is you have one spot to play around with. And if Garrett Cooper is going to be that bat off your bench, then I could see this working out.
Yeah, so there's two things here. Number one, and we did a whole episode of Matt Olson recently. That's still relevant. That's in our podcast feed from a few weeks ago about just the first base position and Matt Olson and our capsule there. But we did note on that show the Braves have not really had a backup first baseman. Now, they haven't really needed one because Olson plays every game for every season, basically. But if, in the event that he would ever get hurt, they might need someone to play first base. Cooper can definitely do that. It's a minor league deal as well. So, like, you can sign a minor league deal for a guy without having a plan. You could just be like, hey, Garrett Cooper's a major league quality player. We want to bring him in. We have no plan. That's possible. Could be first base depth. And the wild card here, and you kind of allude to it a little bit, is that he used to play some outfield. Now, corner outfield, you might imagine as a first baseman, he's not playing center. Like, he's not a great defender, but he might be able to stay in the left field and make he has played there in the major leagues. In fact, he played there it was 2 games, but he played there last year for 2 games. He hasn't played much outfield since 2021. Those I think he's a corner infielder, first baseman, but he might be able to stand there. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is that, number one, the Braves don't have a lot of outfield depth right now, as well documented, but also could be a platoon player in a certain aspect if he can play left. And again, that's a big if, but he is a lefty masher. He has a career 115 WRC plus against lefties, which is the opposite of Jared Kelenic. So if you were to pair someone with Jared Kelenic, I'm not saying he's a perfect player to do that, but if the Braves wanted to have a platoon guy, that's the side they need more than the other side, is the guy who hits lefties. Garrett Cooper can do that. I don't know if that's any part of this, but if you're squinting to try to figure out what the role could be, if he could play corner outfield, it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, I think with Cooper, you bring him to spring training and you throw him in the outfield and see how it is. And
can you do this?
Right. Physically, yes. Is it Jorge Soler bad? Or is it like, okay, let's play him out there and we'll be okay, but let's hope there's not a dozen baseballs hit to left field that night. He's clearly more of a bat first type of player at this point. It does give you some insurance in case, God forbid, Matt Olson get hurt. Also a DH. If Ozuna were to pull something, then you need a DH every night. I think Cooper would probably be fine in that. But it's effectively a risk-free proposition. As a veteran player, if Cooper just stinks it up in the spring, he probably walks into Brian Snitker's office and says, hey, Snit, if you're not going to play me, if I'm not going to make the team, please cut me loose and I'll find another team to try out for. And, at this point in his career, he's in his early mid-30s. He might just want to be part of like the 26th man on a really good team. He's not done a lot of winning in his career with Miami. And I think there's probably a point for players who are self-aware that maybe they're not 162 game starters anymore. But if he's good enough to swing the bat occasionally and maybe stand in a corner and back up Matt Olson or Marcell Ozuna, he might be interested in that. And if he has a good spring, I'm sure he will be in the mix. And the Braves could build a roster where he's able to be basically a pinch hit only type, even in an era where with the DH, you just don't get that a whole lot in games.
Yeah, and it's also a minor league deal, so maybe you stick him in Gwinnett and play first base. They don't really have a minor league first baseman that they're in love with either. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you want someone in the organization who you like, and it's Olson insurance. Like, we talked a few times, like if Matt Olson, was out for 2 months, they'd probably put Ozuna at first base, would be my guess. But if it was a week, you may not want to do that. You might want to just call up a guy from AAA to plug him in for 3 days,
Sure.
And Garrett Cooper would be very useful to do that. He was bad last year in a pretty small sample size. I don't know if he's just cooked or what. It's hard to tell in that small of a sample. It was like 100 plate appearances across two, three teams. But he was fine in the minors. Like, I think Garrett Cooper was as of 2023, so not that long ago, a year plus ago, was a major league caliber hitter. So if he's still that guy, there's room on your roster for at least on your 40-man roster for a player like this. And the downside is zero. So I'm not like throwing a parade, but honestly, he's been a better major league player for longer than Brian De La Cruz. Like he's the most established major league player that they have signed this winter, which is funny, but it's true. Now the upside's not super high and all those things. I think we did a pretty good job laying that out. And he is a first baseman, but I can at least see why they did it. If he's available and was like, "Hey, I'll sign a minor league deal with you," the answer, if it's just a yes or no, my answer is definitely yes. Give him that deal and see what happens.
Of course. Yeah. Hey, and if he wants to play in Gwinnett and be a backup guy and make $150,000 or whatever the going rate is for a major league veteran in the minor leagues, usually, funny enough, the Associated Press usually comes out with those figures. So in a couple of days, we'll probably know what Garrett Cooper will make if he's in Gwinnett and sticks around. But you take a chance. It's basically no risk. If he's 0 for 15 in the spring, you shake hands and say, it's probably not going to work out. But we're talking about Garrett Cooper for about 10 minutes now.
That's enough.
If we were at the point in the offseason where the Braves had signed Tanner Scott and had signed Jerks and Profar and had traded for Sonny Gray or some other pitcher, we probably would have talked about Garrett Cooper for 2 minutes. But I think kind of the state of the Braves offseason is it's like, oh, we know Garrett Cooper. Let's talk about him on top of course, with Jeff Hoffman, and then one more item we're going to hit on here today.
Yeah, I think Braves fans, at least diehards, will recognize Garrett Cooper because he played with the Marlins. That's the biggest. He's the bigger name than, like I think you said this earlier. He's a bigger name than he probably should be to us because we've just seen him play a lot of baseball in the last several years. All right, last thing before we got here on a short podcast. The Braves announced this. There was rumblings. There's been a little bit of reporting on this already, but now it's official. The Braves are going to televise. Well, someone's going to televise 26 of the 30 spring training games this year, which for some teams would not be big news. But the Braves have frustratingly not done this for several years. Just for comparison's sake, last year was 8. So they've more than tripled the output of games we can watch in the month of March. And it's through a combination of TV, streaming, etc. It's FanDuel, which is the flagship, cable network that has the most of the games during the season. Also, this Gray Media deal, which I think Steven and Sean talked about a little bit, but it's this local over-the-air TV deal for spring training games. And then also, they're going to stream 9 games online for free at Braves.com and in the actual MLB app, which I know you're able to watch. And I'm jealous of you, Scott. You're able to watch the Braves on MLB TV all year round. I can't do that locally without some hijinks. So not much to this. I just want to say it's a good thing that they're finally doing this.
Oh, it's great. I mean, those spring training games, generally they're in the middle of the workday. So, if you have an office job where you can have a little Braves baseball on in the corner while you do your thing, why not? It's a great opportunity to see the young prospects who are in camp, especially early on. And who doesn't love watching Braves baseball? And it has been a point of annoyance for years now where, I think the Yankees broadcasted every single spring training game last year on Yes. Yep. And I think the Red Sox did 29 out of 30 last year. And then you mentioned the Braves had 8 games. At the end of the day, it's spring training. Usually by the 6th inning, you don't recognize 55% of the players on the field. But it is great. It's a win for fans. It's great that, and just a quick note that you mentioned now on FanDuel, if folks missed the announcement maybe a month or two ago, FanDuel TV is effectively replacing Bally. At least just basically in terms of name only.
It's just a name change. It's the same group that owns it, Diamond Sports Group. People think that FanDuel, the sports betting company, owns it. That's not true. They're just a name. They're just a sponsorship deal for this channel. But yeah, it should be in the same place that you already had. There is this long-standing TV weirdness that will still continue in a lot of ways. Locally, I know it's frustration for a lot of people. It's on YouTube TV, for instance. You have to have certain packages. You got to have cable to get it. It's not a lot of fun. This is the one area where it's better to be Scott in Arizona to watch the Braves than it is to be here in Atlanta, which is fun. It's funny, but it's true. It's way cheaper. It's way easier to be out of market than in market, which doesn't make sense. But here we are in 2024.
And God, let's hope that changes, not just for the Braves, but for fans of everywhere. Get rid of ridiculous blackouts, and
I think it's coming. I think it might be another couple years, but I think it's coming. We're getting closer and closer to that.
It is so unbelievably stupid that somebody who lives in the apartment complex across the street from Truist has a harder time watching a Braves game legally than than I do 2,000 miles away.
Yep.
I mean, come on. What are we doing?
That's well said. But hey, this is a good step in the right direction. A lot of these games are at 1:00 in the afternoon. I won't be able to watch all of them. I won't tell you that I will, but I know a lot of people can watch a lot more of them now than they were in before. And a couple of these are there's a couple of evening games, like 6:00 starts, 4:00 starts. Like you can watch some more baseball. And look, having it on in the background is cool. We love baseball. Like we wouldn't be doing the podcast and probably listening to the podcast if you didn't love baseball. Having it on more in February and March is just a good thing. There's no really nuance to that whatsoever. It's like, hey, more baseball, cool.
Yeah. Spencer Strider is going to make his first spring appearance. Boom, let's turn it on. Drake Baldwin is catching and batting cleanup that day. Boom, let's turn it on. Or the Braves are running out their everyday regulars for 5 innings today. Awesome, let's watch 5 innings. That kind of thing. And it is nice that I guess the Braves are taking a big step in the right direction to having those games broadcasted.
100%. Okay, Scott, we have fulfilled our pledge to keep this one short. God bless it. We did it once. We never do it ever, but we managed to do it today on a Monday afternoon. Pseudo-emergency, not so emergency, but quick, unplanned podcast. Scott, for those people that might not be familiar with your work beyond this show, where can they find all of your musings on the internet?
Yep. I am at Scott Coleman 55 on socials if you want to follow along there. And let us hope, Brad, now that we are about a month away from pitchers and catchers showing up, let's hope that the dam breaks and we get some Braves moves. We get some just more activity across the whole league, too. I mean, we've been pacing for like one signing every 5 days, maybe the last couple of weeks. And It always slows down around Christmas and New Year's and everything. But let's hope we are at the end of the tunnel for the Braves, just basically silent winter. And we are talking about real transactions and maybe not minor league deals where if you squint, it's like, yeah, I could see Garrett Cooper, 26 man, maybe.
Yeah, that'd be more fun to talk about for sure. No, we'll have more on the podcast this week. I don't want to spoil it. We have a couple of things planned, one of which has not been recorded yet, so I won't talk about it until it's done. But more to come on the show, as always. So please subscribe to Hammer Territory anywhere you find your podcast. If you want to follow me, you can at BT Rowland. Follow Scott at Scott Coleman 55. And the show is across social platforms at Hammer Territory, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. The biggest thing is subscribing and telling your friends. We're also on YouTube. Please like the show there. Comment if you'd like to on the podcast. 5-star reviews, all that fun stuff. We really appreciate you listening. We'll have more later on this week, and we'll see you all next time.